All anxiety is sympathetic nervous system response. Right? You have your brain and spinal cord.
Right.
Kind of important stuff, right?
Yes.
It is central to everything you do. All of your emotions, all of your sensations, everything you do is based upon how well your brain and spinal cord are functioning. There's a branch of your central nervous system called your autonomic nervous system, which is split between our sympathetic nervous system, which activates us. That's our fight or flight response. Most people have heard of the fight or flight response, right?
Yep.
That's our sympathetic nervous system. It activates us. And then the complementary system is our parasympathetic nervous system. That is our body's relaxation response. It's responsible for ramping us down.
Okay.
Anytime we perceive a threat, sympathetic nervous system response, our fight or flight response, activation is automatic. Doesn't matter if it's a big threat, like if I'd pick up a gun right now and put it in your face, right?
Right.
Or if it were a small threat, like
Yeah.
maybe you want to do something and your dad says that you can't do it.
Right.
But then that sympathetic nervous system response is automatic. And then what happens? Well, when our fight or flight response goes off, there are a number of physical changes that occur. Right? Our heart starts to beat faster because why does our heart start beating faster? Well, Mother Nature's like, okay, well, our heart's automatically going to start beating faster because it's going to move blood to our major muscles of our legs so we can run away, to our arms so we could pop the saber-tooth tiger in the nose.
Right.
That's why your heart starts beating faster. What else happens? Muscle tension increases, right, to automatically prepare you for fight or flight. And what does the muscle tension do? Well, sometimes it makes us get kind of shaky. We get kind of like restless with things, right? Respiration increases, so we start breathing more, and it changes our breathing patterns. Sometimes you hear kids or adults complain about like getting a nervous stomach or having butterflies in their stomach.
Yep.
Well, the reason that occurs is because you only have so much blood in your body at any given time. Mother Nature had to find blood to move to the major muscles, so she had to think about it. She's like, okay, where am I going to get this extra blood from? She's like, I got it. Do human beings really need to digest a turkey sandwich when a saber-tooth tiger is chasing after them, or do they just need to get out of there?
Right.
Just need to get out of there. So
Okay.
digestion shuts down with sympathetic nervous system response. Blood flows out of the stomach to the major muscles for fight or flight response. And then also since we digest food with stomach acid, if our stomach's not used for digestion, sometimes that leads to like an acid or what we call sometimes an acidic or nervous stomach. Our salivary glands shut down. So sometimes we get dry mouth, right? Sometimes our pupils will dilate with sympathetic nervous system response, which can kind of make our vision a little funky. If our breathing changes and we start sucking in too much oxygen, not giving off the same amount of carbon dioxide, that can lead to hyperventilation, which can lead us to be dizzy, lightheaded, headaches, feeling like things aren't real. Sometimes if we're really hyperventilating, we feel like we can't get any oxygen when the trick is that we're getting too much oxygen. So all of these physical changes occur. It's just the way Mother Nature made us. There's nothing dangerous or threatening about any of them, right? But it's just your alarm system working. But if you perceive threat, that's automatically going to go off. And as we talked about before, what happens? Does that have the potential to derail your athletic performance?
Yeah, well,
Absolutely. Anxiety is always based upon perception of threat. If we perceive something as dangerous or threatening, sympathetic nervous system response is automatic. And that's ultimately what anxiety is. So whether the threat is underperforming in a high pressure situation, whether the threat is disappointing your parents, whether the threat is you want to do something and you can't do it, whether the threat is a saber-tooth tiger busted into the door right now, whether the threat is getting coronavirus, right? So yes, in our environment, I have seen an explosion of anxiety because the way that, the environment that we've been living with, there are many additional perceived threats. Robert Nidafer, who's a sports psychologist out of North Carolina, has identified a choke as a highly motivated individual who starts to pick up on negative feedback that their performance isn't going well, which then is a perceived threat. It triggers anxiety, which is ultimately sympathetic nervous system response.
Okay.
When sympathetic nervous system response goes off, heart rate increases, muscle tension increases, respiration increases, and understandably, that has vast potential to negatively impact performance. My approach, I call it Disappear Fear. That's my anxiety program.
Okay.
And as I said before, the first piece starts with psychoeducation and understanding about anxiety. So the way I usually start out to explain it is I say, you know what? You may not know this, but you got a dragon that lives in the back of your mind. You got one, I got one, your mom's got one. Everybody has a dragon.
Just starting.
Yeah. And since it lives in the back of your mind, right? There's
Sure.
nothing that it can do to hurt you. It can't scratch you with claws, can't burn you with fire.
Okay.
But what's really interesting about these dragons, there's only one thing they can eat. The only thing in the whole world they can eat, any guesses?
Fear.
Yeah, exactly. Good. Very good. Fears and worries. That's all they can eat. So imagine if there was only one thing you could eat. Imagine the only thing in the whole world you could eat was corn dogs. Would you have to get really good at finding corn dogs?
You would.
Yeah, absolutely. Because otherwise, you'd shrivel up and starve.
Right.
So since your dragon only eats fears and worries, what does it want from you?
All of them. Fears and worries.
All the time, right? 24/7. Because then it's got like Old Country buffet, right? As much as it wants to eat whenever it wants to.
Yes.
But since your dragon can't do anything to you, it's got to get really sneaky. So your dragon's there in the back of your mind, watching, waiting, learning, figuring out the things that make you afraid. And once they find that stuff out, they start messing with you. Start to like whisper in your ear, like, you're going to mess up. Your parents are going to be like really disappointed in you. Or your teammates are going to be like really angry with you. Or like when my kids were young, right? It's
Yeah.
like, there's a monster under your bed.
Right,
or a
right.
bad guy's going to
Yes.
break into the house,
Yes.
right? If your dragon tells you that stuff, does it get you worried? Get you scared?
Of course.
Yeah, absolutely. So then you get scared. You give the dragon that food.
Yeah.
Your dragon gobbles it up. And the more we give them, the bigger they get. And even when they get really big, right, they can't do anything to us to hurt us. But you know what? The bigger they get, the more that we start hearing that stuff in the back of our mind, right? You're going to mess up. Everyone's going to laugh at you. Something bad's going to happen. When I get an athlete in, they're often presenting and saying that they're anxious and the anxiety is undermining their performance. So I'll use a swimmer, for example, and I'll ask them then, how did you know you were anxious?
Oh, that's a fascinating question.
What do you think the most common response is?
It may be something physiological. They felt it.
Exactly. They usually comment on the physical sensations, right? Like my heart gets beating really fast and I get all shaky and,
Sure.
and restless
Yeah.
and, my stomach, I get these butterflies in my stomach. Okay, and then what happens? What happens after you notice those sensations? Well, then I have the thought that it's not going to go well.
Yeah.
And the thought that your sports performance isn't going to go well, is that a perceived threat?
Yes, it is.
Absolutely. So what does that do? It triggers further sympathetic nervous system arousal, right? And then those sensations come on even more. And then as we're thinking negatively about our performance not going well, what emotion does that lead to?
Yeah.
Fear, frustration, right? So,
Dragons even,
and then
yes.
you go right down the rabbit hole with it.
Yes.
So then I usually ask, okay, like before you ever had anxiety, back when swimming was just fun, you ever noticed any of those sensations? Do you think you ever had any of those sensations? Like your heart would start beating faster before a swim meet? You might get some
Yeah.
butterflies in your stomach. You might get kind of restless. Think you ever noticed that before you had anxiety?
Yeah. It's an interesting question. They're gonna.
Of course you did.
Yeah.
Of course you
So
did.
what's the difference? That's an interesting piece there.
The difference isn't the physiological arousal. You don't ever
how
want to
they
go into any performance situation flatlining, right? You
Sure.
always want some type of arousal. But if you notice those sensations and that arousal and you attribute it, you put the label on that it's anxiety, that's a threat, and then it spirals down into the rabbit hole. If you notice those sensations, and back in the day when you noticed them, you would just say, I'm excited. I'm ramped up.
Sure.
I'm really jacked to do this, right? Then it's not a perceived threat and it doesn't spiral further down the rabbit hole.
And-
So that's the cognitive piece of what we do to try to, not only train athletes, but try to train all clients to, change the way that they think, because it results in a whole different physiological experience and a whole different emotional experience. Anytime I work with anxiety, the first step is psychoeducation.
Okay.
Helping the client to understand what anxiety is. Because again, when we understand things clearly, it makes us feel like we have a lot more control over things and it's less scary and freaky.
Right.
So the first step is psychoeducation and understanding what anxiety is and how it's impacting an individual. Then we move into providing tools to help them to manage that anxiety. Anxiety is well manageable with cognitive behavioral techniques. It is the gold standard of treatment for anxiety, and it works really well. And the good thing is, it usually doesn't take that long. We provide the foundational tools, and then, as the client works with those tools and they master those tools, they're able to manage not only anxiety, but also stress that they're going to face throughout the entirety of their life.